I was on the wrong ridge when it happened. That is the first thing you need to know about me. That I watched the whole engagement from the far side of the Harren choke point through a scratched Zeiss scope, and still spent 6 months convincing myself I had seen what I actually saw. My name is Aldrich Messon. I am a captain in the Eastern Theater NATO Liaison Attachment, which is a formal way of saying that I was for 2 years on the other side of the line from the men I now work beside. It gives me a particular angle on things. It also means that when a woman proves what she is made of, I recognize it in a way that the others sometimes do not, because I have been on the receiving end of that kind of proof before. And it is not something you mistake for luck. I want to tell you about the gate first, because the gate is where this story begins, 3 days before Harren Pass. And because I was there, and because I did not say a single word, it was a Thursday morning for Fabi Kaladin, the main compound entrance, east side, where the briefing boards had been posted since Aero 600, and the coalition element, 31 men, 2 vehicles, 1 forward air controller, had been staging for a road clearance operation through the Harren approach. The brief was running long. Captain Varn, the element lead, was not a man who shortened his briefs. He was thorough, I will give him that, and he was competent in most of the ways that mattered. But he had a habit I had seen in officers on my old side of the line too. A habit of looking at a person and deciding in the first 4 seconds exactly what category they belonged in, and never once checking his work. She arrived at the edge of the briefing group just as Varn was covering the secondary exfil route. She was carrying a radio, a field notebook, and a rifle that had seen more deployments than anyone present. She was not in the front. She was listening from the left side of the group, pencil moving. Varn noticed her at the same moment I did. He stopped mid-sentence. "This brief is for the element," he said. "Interpreters wait at the intel tent." She did not move immediately. She said quietly that she had been requested for the Harren approach, by name, by the NATO intelligence officer, Lieutenant Colonel Harv. Varn stepped forward and put his hand flat against her shoulder and shoved her back 2 paces, not hard enough to put her down, hard enough to make his meaning clear in front of 31 men. "A translation asset is not a trigger puller," he said. "You wait at the tent." She steadied. She did not reach for his wrist. She did not raise her voice. She looked at him for exactly 2 seconds, then turned and walked back toward the intel tent without a word. I was standing 6 feet from Varn when he did it. I said nothing. I am not proud of that. I have run it back more times than I care to count. The 2 seconds I had, the single sentence it would have taken, and I spent them looking at my boots. The brief resumed. The element mounted up. We moved out at 1100. I was not in the column. My role that morning was forward observation from the eastern ridge, a secondary position Harv had assigned to close a gap in the communications net. I had a radio, a scope, a long view of the Harren choke point, and nothing to do but watch and relay. The column made good time through the approach road. The terrain in the Harren corridor is hard going. Loose shale, 2 blind bends, a 300-meter stretch where the road narrows to single file between a rock face and a drop. In easier terrain, it would be a mild problem. In the Harren, it is a decision point, and whoever controls the high ground above it controls everything that moves below. I was watching the column thread the narrows at 1347 when the first contact hit. 2 PKM positions, northeast face, overlapping fields of fire. The lead vehicle took a tire and a chassered windshield. The column stopped. Varn's radio went loud with traffic. The second PKM opened from the south face 30 seconds later, and the column was suddenly caught in a V with no clean answer. I called it in. I gave Harv the grid. I watched through the scope and felt the particular helplessness of a man who can see everything and reach nothing. Then something moved on the high ground above the northeast face. It was a single figure, moving low, moving fast, angling toward the first PKM position from above of. I almost reported it as a threat. My thumb was on the transmit button. But the movement was wrong for an ambush element. Too deliberate, too quiet, no spacing for a second man. 1 person, moving alone, from a direction that made no tactical sense if you had come up from the valley. The first PKM went silent at 1409. I had my scope on the position when it happened. I saw the figure settle, adjust fire twice. The economy of it, the absence of waste, 2 rounds. The gun stopped. The crew did not get up. The second PKM was still working the south face. The figure moved again, traversing across open rock, 50 meters of exposed ridge, and I watched and held my breath the way you hold your breath at something you should not be seeing. She was not running. She was moving at a pace that told me she had already calculated the angles and decided they were acceptable. There is a particular quality to that kind of movement. I have seen it twice in my life before that morning. Both times, it was in men who had been doing this for a very long time. The South PKM went silent at 1431. The column was still pinned. Two more positions had opened from the high ground, enemy infantry working down the east spur. I watched her reposition. She moved north along the ridge line, found a seam in the rock, and disappeared into it. For 11 minutes, I saw nothing. The column's radio traffic was climbing. Varn calling for Cass, the forward air controller working frequencies, everyone talking at once. Then the east spur went quiet. One position at a time. Across the next 40 minutes, the ridge above the Harren Narrows went silent. I tracked each one through the scope. Each time, the geometry was the same. A single point of fire, placed above and behind the enemy position, brief, controlled, finished, no suppression, no spray. Each shot placed exactly where it needed to be and nowhere else. At 15:18, the column moved. They cleared the Narrows in 11 minutes and broke contact on the open road south of the choke point. 31 men. 2 vehicles, one of them on a flat tire that had been running on the rim for 40 minutes. Everyone accounted for. I held position on the ridge until the light went bad. I counted through the scope what I could count. I stopped at 19. I did not have full visibility of the north spur. The number may be higher. I reported 19 confirmed and left it at that. I crossed the Harren the next morning with a 2-man escort and a grid reference. The position I found on the northeast face was as bare as a chapel. Brass casings arranged by caliber at the edge of the rock shelf, not scattered, arranged. The way a disciplined shooter polishes brass, out of habit on a range and out of principle in the field. A single boot print in the shale dust, heading north, nothing left behind, nothing discarded. She had come, done the work, and departed the way a professional departs, without announcement, without evidence of distress, without a single unnecessary mark on the ground. I drove back to Fob Culloden in time for the element's return. The column came in at 1640. The men were quiet in the way. Men are quiet when they have been close to something they do not fully understand yet. Barnes stepped out of the lead vehicle and stood in the compound yard for a moment, not moving. His radio operator said something to him. Varn shook his head. She was sitting at a field table on the east side of the yard, writing in her notebook. She had been back for hours. She had signed in her weapon, filed her radio card, and from what I was told later, eaten a hot meal and drunk 2 cups of coffee. The notebook was not an after-action record. It was, one of the support staff told me, a language reference she had been building for 3 years. Phrases, regional dialect notes, idioms that the standard references didn't carry. She had been working on it while the compound waited to find out if the column was coming back. Lieutenant Colonel Harve came across the yard and spoke to her for 2 minutes. I could not hear what he said. She listened, nodded twice, said something brief. Harve nodded and walked back to the operations building. It was Harve who told Varn. I do not know exactly what was said. I know that Varn stood in the operations doorway for a long moment, looking at the compound yard, and then he walked out into it. He crossed the yard in full view of the element, the men who had been on that road, the support staff, the gate crew, the liaison section that included me. He stopped in front of her field table. She looked up from the notebook. He rendered a full formal salute. 4 counts, deliberate, correct in every particular. She looked at him for 2 seconds. Then she stood and returned it, equal in every particular. He said 3 words. I was close enough to hear them. He said I was wrong. She said nothing. She sat back down and went back to the notebook. Varn walked back across the yard and went inside. He did not look at anyone. I stood at attention without being told to. I do not know exactly when I came to that decision. I think it happened somewhere around the 3rd count of the salute, when it became clear that what I was watching was not a formality, that Varn was not performing something, he was paying something, with the only currency he had left. I understood that. Where I am from, we have a word for a debt that cannot be reduced. I do not have a clean translation for it in English. The closest I can get is what you owe the person who saved a life you were not protecting. Her call sign was Iron Veil. Harve told me this himself, later that evening, over a map table in the operations building. He said she had been running classified attachments for 11 years. He said the Harren engagement was not the longest she had held alone. He said the record from her second deployment, which he was not at liberty to detail, involved a position held for 6 hours with a single rifle and a broken radio. He said this as though he were reading from a weather report. I do not think he intended it as dramatic. I think he had simply known it long enough that it had become plain fact. I wrote my after-action report that night. The relevant section was 4 lines. I described the engagement, the grid, the confirmed count, the outcome. I wrote, unknown coalition element provided fire support from high ground above the Harren northeast face, and suppressed 4 enemy positions, enabling column extraction. 19 confirmed enemy casualties. Element identification, classified. That was what I wrote. What I wanted to write. What I have been trying to find the right words for since that morning on the ridge, watching something move across open rock with a patience that had no name I could put to it, was something closer to the truth. That there are people who exist in a different register than the rest of us. That they do not announce themselves, and they do not linger. That if you are lucky enough to watch one work from a scratched scope on the wrong ridge, in the cold, you will spend the rest of your career trying to be worth the air in the same valley. I haven't found the right words yet. I keep the after-action report in a folder. I keep working on what should be in it.